Hello everybody, Mike Tenney here at the Tenney School. We are here for Tenney vlog number 11, and today we're going to address the question of how long should a class period be? And I'll give you a little hint. It's maybe a little bit shorter than you think, but we'll get into the research later. For those of you who may be new to our channel, we are doing this Tenney vlog series to take on topics of interest to teachers and parents, and we're trying to talk about things that may help their parents and educators help their kids achieve the next level of success academically. And do us a favor, if you like the topic, please leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel, and you'll get these videos fed to you more quickly and easily in the future. So without further ado, we will get into we're doing this one a little bit different than we have in the past. A couple changes. One is I'm doing this one by myself. This topic is pretty research intensive, so I'm going to be showing some charts and graphs to the side of me. So we thought it would be more conducive in an individual format to do it that way. And two, this is actually our first video for the 2017-2018 school year. So welcome back everybody. We're glad to be at this again. And you know, Harvey has affected us a little bit, so things are a bit delayed on getting these out, but we plan to have some videos going forward for your we're going to dive into research. A lot of what we're talking about, we're a 6th through 12th grade school here, so we're thinking about teenagers. Some of the research does go into a lot more depth on the college age kids, but we think that the findings are pretty applicable for those of us who are setting up middle and high schools as well. So the things that we're going to talk about, we're going to get into attention over time, we're going to talk about attention lapses, and then we're going to get into retention over time before we kind of wrap it all up with our conclusions. Okay, so point number one, I wanted to talk about attention over time. If you do any research or look into any of the research on student attention spans in the classroom, you're going to come across one study by Mittendorf and Kalish, which was done back in the late 90s. This came up every time I looked into this. This was one of the primary reference sources that I came up with. And in that study, they said that as students get into the classroom, there's a 3 to 5 minute settling in period is what they call it, and then they have a 10 to 18 minute time of optimal focus. And then once that time is completed, they go into this series of attention lapses where they're losing focus and then it's coming back, and then they're losing focus again and it's coming back. So what I did here was I put together this graph to kind of show you attention over time, and you can see that the attention of a student is going to ramp up as they start class. Then it gets to that optimal focus time, and then they go into those attention lapses. And again, this is based off of the research that was published by Mittendorf and Kalish. So if you add together the settling period and the optimal focus time, and if you take the top end of those, you add 5 and 18, you're really talking about 23 minutes of good productive learning with your students. And then you start going into those attention lapses. So 23 minutes is a pretty short period of time, and I think most of us are doing classes that are longer than that. And so those teachers that are in those rooms are really going to have to fight those attention lapses later on in their class periods, because they're going to happen. So that is how does attention change over time for students in the classroom setting. The next thing that we wanted to talk about was going to be those attention lapses. Now the research for this was a little bit of a different source, and we looked at lots of different articles and on this topic, but this attention lapse is a little bit of a different thing, and it's a little different from what the previous research showed. Most of these attention lapses that they found in classrooms and they did these studies, they're generally shorter in length. They said generally 1 minute or less is what the attention lapse is going to be on students. As a lecture progresses or as the lesson progresses, these lapses are going to become more frequent. So and by the way, I'm going to put links to the research that we used to come up with this vlog below, so you can always go and do your own background research on this. But as the lesson progresses, at the beginning, the time between lapses is about 5 minutes, this research said. And then at the end of the lesson, or as the lesson progresses, it goes to every 2 minutes. So at the end of a lesson, you're getting a 2-minute attention span burst and then a 1-minute attention lapse. So a third of your time is lost in terms of getting content to your student as you go longer and longer through your lesson. Now, one encouraging sign that this research came up with, or some research came up with, is that you can really minimize those time and attention lapses, and you can maximize the time between attention lapses by using an active learning environment. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details on exactly what that means. If you Google active learning, you're going to find all sorts of material on how to create an active learning environment, but suffice it to say, it's not a lecture format. It needs to be something more engaging to the student, question and answer, hands-on activities, those types of things, classroom discussions. Those things are going to really help you keep your student engaged, minimize those lapses, and maximize the time between attention lapses. Okay, so we've covered 2 points there. One, we talked about attention over time for our students. Then we talked about attention lapses and what that looks like in students. The final thing I wanted to talk about is retention over time. So this is another kind of look at class length and how that affects how we help our students in the classroom. And what the studies show there is I think, intuitively makes sense in some ways, and others it does not. Students actually are going to retain the material that you teach at the beginning of the lesson better than they are going to retain the material that you teach at the end of the lesson. When you look at it, if you overlay our attention lapses that we talked about a little bit earlier, this kind of makes sense, that you're going to have fewer attention lapses at the beginning of the lesson, and so you would likely see better retention of the material you're teaching then than you would at the end, where you have more attention lapses. But there's some counterintuitivity to this as well. When they did this research, they actually taught a lesson, and then they gave the students tests over the material that was taught in the lesson, and they found that the students actually did better on the material from the beginning of the lesson than the end of the lesson. And you might think the thing that you just taught they're more likely to retain than the thing that you taught at the beginning of the lesson, but it turns out not to be true. So if you're looking at trying to teach material that your students will retain, you want to do that at the beginning of the lesson. So those are basically the 3 things that we wanted to bring out about attention and lapses in attention and student retention. So kind of getting back to our summary and the question of, well, how long should classes really be at the 6th to 12th grade level? One of the first points that teachers, I think, need to take home to heart is teach the important things first. So when you have a lesson that you're setting up, if there are complicated materials or tricky materials, put those at the front of your lesson. That's where you're going to be much more likely to have your students retain the material long term. Second key, which was kind of from our attention lapse section of the study, is use an active learning environment. So we need to get out of the habit of lecturing. Lecturing is not the more productive way to keep our students engaged and keep their attention and minimize those attention lapses. Less lecture, use hands-on learning, use discussion, use question and answer, those types of things that are more likely to keep your students engaged, which will help them retain the material better that you're trying to teach them. And then the final thing, and we talked about this at the beginning, is my goodness, those of us that can control how long our classes are, we need to make them shorter. I know that there's a lot of schools that run on 50-minute periods. There's schools that run on 2-hour periods, hour-and-a-half periods. Those are really, you're making life for your teachers much more difficult by making your classes so long. Here at the Tenney School, we have chosen to use very short periods. Our periods are actually 27 minutes long, and then 3-hour passing period. So those really short periods we think are really helpful in helping us get our students more active in the learning environment, less attention lapses, and more retention of the material that we're teaching. And if you go back to that original slide on the productive optimal learning time, we're actually even a little longer than we should be. But that's where we are now at our school, 27 minutes a period, and we encourage all schools to look at that and see how they can set up their schedules to be more productive with their students. So that's basically it for today. I hope that you guys got something out of us talking about how long classes should be, and you can take away the key lesson about attention over time. How does that change? Student attention lapses, what are the characteristics of that, and how can you factor that into developing your lessons? And then the final thing that we looked at was retention over time and how that should be considered as you think about what content you teach where in your lessons. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. Once again, if you like the content, if you have something to say, agree or disagree, please do so below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you like this, like our page, share the videos. You'll see more in the coming months. All right, and that's about it from here. We'll see you guys next time.